It was just another day at the Waypoint Diner when the door swung open and everything changed. The waitress moved silently between tables, careful to keep her sleeves pulled down, hiding the blue-purple marks circling her wrists. Nobody ever asked, nobody ever cared, until the Admiral walked in. He watched as a local grabbed her arm roughly, and that's when he saw it. The flinch, the bruises, the practiced smile. The entire diner froze as the Admiral's voice cut through the air. Take your hands off a decorated naval special warfare officer. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing. Some heroes walk among us, invisible until someone finally sees them. The Waypoint Diner sat at the edge of Port Ashton like a weather-beaten lighthouse, its neon sign flickering against the gray Oregon sky. Inside, salt crusted the windows, blurring the view of the churning Pacific beyond. The worn vinyl booths had faded from cherry red to dusty rose, and the chrome fixtures bore the patina of thousands of fingerprints. It was the kind of place where locals came to share gossip. Fishermen stopped for coffee after dawn hauls, and tourists paused without looking twice at their surroundings, or the people who kept it running. Vera Larson moved between tables with quiet efficiency, her movements precise and economical. At 38, she carried herself with a certain reserve that customers often mistook for shyness or indifference. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple knot, and her blue-gray eyes rarely made direct contact with anyone for more than a moment. She had perfected the art of being forgettable, just another waitress in another coastal diner, in another small town where nothing ever happened. "Order up for table 5, Harlan called from the kitchen, his voice rough from decades of cigarettes and early mornings. The cook had been at the Waypoint longer than anyone could remember, a fixture as permanent as the laminated menus and the ancient jukebox in the corner. Vera collected the plate, balancing it on her forearm with practiced ease. Despite the summer heat that had settled over Port Ashton, she wore a long-sleeved white uniform shirt. A thin sheen of sweat gathered at her temples as she worked, but she never rolled up her sleeves like the other waitresses. "Here you go," she murmured, setting the plate of fish and chips in front of old Pete, who barely looked up from his newspaper. The headline screamed something about military exercises along the coast, but Vera's eyes skipped over it without lingering. "More coffee when you get a chance," he grunted, the same thing he said every day at precisely this time. Vera nodded and moved on to the next table, where a young couple on a road trip up the coast sat studying their menus. The woman smiled at her, but the man barely acknowledged her presence, too busy scrolling through his phone. Tourists passing through, never. Staying long enough to notice anything about the town or its inhabitants, which was exactly how Vera preferred it. The lunch rush continued in its predictable rhythm, the bell above the door chiming occasionally as customers came and went. Vera fell into the familiar pattern, taking orders, delivering food, refilling coffee cups, all while maintaining her careful invisibility. It was a skill she had honed over the 3 years she'd been in Port Ashton, being present without being noticed, efficient without being memorable, until the door swung open at 12:35, bringing a blast of summer air and Sheriff Donovan's tall frame. The sheriff nodded to Vera as he took his usual seat at the counter. "Afternoon, Vera," he said, setting his hat beside him. "The usual, please." "Coming right up," she replied, pouring him coffee without asking. 3 years, and he always ordered the same thing, a turkey club with extra pickles and black coffee. As she turned to put in his order, she caught him watching her with a slight frown. She knew what had caused it, a fresh bruise peeking from beneath her collar, not quite hidden by the uniform. She adjusted her shirt quickly, but it was too late. "Everything okay with you?" Donovan asked, his voice carefully casual. "Fine," Vera answered with practiced ease. "Just clumsy. Hit my shoulder on the storage room shelf." The sheriff's expression suggested he didn't believe her, but he also didn't press further. It was the same dance they'd performed several times over the past few months, a momentary concern followed by mutual pretense. "Heard anything from Desmond lately?" Donovan asked instead, stirring sugar into his coffee. Vera's hand stilled briefly as she wiped down the counter. "He's been busy at the marina," she said neutrally. "Summer season and all." Donovan nodded slowly. "Had some complaints about noise over there last night. Boats coming in after hours, some kind of argument." "I wouldn't know," Vera replied, the faintest edge entering her voice. "I was here until closing." Before the sheriff could respond, the bell chimed again, and the very subject of their conversation entered the diner. Desmond Thorne strode in with the confidence of someone who believed he owned every room he entered. At 36, he was undeniably handsome, with his sun-streaked hair and perpetual tan, the result of days spent on the water at his boat rental business. He was followed by two of his employees, Riker and Jasper, both wearing the marina's blue polo shirts and mirroring Desmond's swaggering demeanor. The trio had clearly started drinking well before the lunch hour. "There she is," Desmond called, spotting Vera behind the counter. "Hiding from me, babe?" Every head in the diner turned briefly before customers studiously returned to their meals, a collective agreement to mind their own business. Vera's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly, but her face remained neutral as she approached their table. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice revealing nothing of the sudden tightness in her chest. Desmond caught her wrist, pulling her closer. "How about a smile for your boyfriend? Haven't seen you in 2 days." His fingers pressed into exactly the spot where a bracelet of bruises circled her wrist, making her wince slightly. If Sheriff Donovan noticed from his position at the counter, he gave no indication. "Been busy," Vera said, gently extracting herself from his grip. Harlan needed extra help with inventory. "Always working?" Desmond shook his head, exchanging glances with his friends. "Never any time for fun anymore. Remember when you used to be fun, Vera?" The question carried an undercurrent that made several nearby diners shift uncomfortably. Everyone in Port Ashton knew Desmond Thorne had a temper, especially when he drank. And everyone knew Vera had been wearing long sleeves regardless of the temperature for months now. But no one said anything. Not to Desmond, whose family had lived in Port Ashton for generations. Not to Vara, the quiet outsider who kept to herself. Not even to Sheriff Donovan, who should have been the one to intervene, but instead focused intently on his coffee. "3 beers, Riker ordered, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "And whatever the special is today." "Kitchen closes in 20 minutes, Vera informed them, professional mask firmly back in place. "I'll bring your drinks right away." As she turned toward the bar, the bell above the door chimed once more. This time, the ensuing silence was immediate and complete, as if someone had abruptly muted every conversation in the diner. Vera sensed the change before she saw its cause, a sudden stillness in the air that raised the fine hairs on the back of her neck. She turned slowly, already knowing somehow that whatever had caused this reaction would disrupt the careful routine she had built. Admiral Calloway Rhodes stood in the entrance, tall and commanding in his dress blues. The summer sun glinted off the ribbons and medals adorning his chest, creating small prisms of light that danced across the diner's worn linoleum. His silver hair was cropped close to his head, and despite being well into his 60s, he stood with the straight-backed posture of someone half his age. Vera froze, coffee pot suspended mid-air, her eyes widening in a rare display of genuine emotion. For a split second, naked recognition flashed across her face, followed by something that might have been fear. The Admiral's gaze swept the diner methodically before settling on Vera. His expression shifted subtly, a micro-expression of surprise quickly controlled. For a long moment, neither moved, the entire diner caught in the strange tension between them. "Table for one, sir?" Harlan called from the kitchen doorway, breaking the spell. The Admiral's response was cut short as Vera's grip on the coffee pot slipped. It crashed to the floor, shattering and sending dark liquids splashing across the linoleum. The sound was deafening in the hushed diner. "I'm sorry," Vera said quickly, dropping to her knees to clean up the mess, her hands suddenly clumsy and uncertain. "I'll get this right away." Admiral Rhodes moved toward the counter, deliberately casual, though his eyes never left Vera. "No rush," he said, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to command. "Accidents happen." Something in his tone made Vera look up, their eyes meeting again across the diner. This time, there was no mistaking the recognition that passed between them, nor the silent communication that followed. "Know each other?" Desmond called from his table, his voice carrying a sharp edge of suspicion. "Just passing through," Rhodes replied evenly, finally breaking his gaze from Vera to acknowledge Desmond. "Naval exercises up the coast. Heard this place had the best fish and chips in Oregon." Desmond's eyes narrowed as he looked between the Admiral and Vera, who had resumed cleaning with focused intensity, her head bowed low over the broken ceramic. Didn't answer my question, he pressed. No, Vera said quickly, too quickly. We've never met. The lie hung in the air, obvious to anyone paying attention. Sheriff Donovan certainly was, his coffee forgotten, as he watched the interaction with growing interest. Vera, you're bleeding, Harlan observed from behind the counter, pointing to her hand where a shard of the broken pot had sliced her palm. She glanced down at the thin line of red with detached surprise, as if the pain hadn't registered. It's nothing, she said, wrapping a napkin around it with the efficiency of someone familiar with field dressings. The movement was too practiced, too clinical for a diner waitress. Admiral Rhodes noted this with a slight narrowing of his eyes before taking a seat at the counter, positioning himself with a clear view of both the entrance and Vera's station. Another waitress approached to take his order, which he gave without looking at the menu. Then he sat in silence, watching as Vera finished cleaning the spill and disappeared into the back room. Haven't seen her that rattled since she first showed up here, Harlan commented to the Admiral, voice low as he wiped down the counter. You sure you two haven't met before? Rhodes took a sip of the water the waitress had brought him. What can you tell me about her? He asked instead of answering. Harlan's protective instincts visibly warred with his curiosity. Not much to tell. Keeps to herself. Works hard. Been here about 3 years now. And him? Rhodes nodded toward Desmond's table, where the three men were now watching a game on the television mounted in the corner, their earlier interest in Vera temporarily forgotten. Harlan's expression darkened. Desmond Thorne, runs the marina. Family's been here forever, which means he thinks the usual rules don't apply to him. He leaned closer, lowering his voice further. Been dating Vera for about 8 months. Started out nice enough, but lately, he gestured vaguely toward where Vera had disappeared. Not so much. Rhodes absorbed this information without comment, his face revealing nothing of his thoughts. When Vera emerged from the back room a few minutes later, her hand neatly bandaged and her composure restored, he watched her with the careful assessment of someone piecing together a puzzle. She deliberately avoided his section of the counter, focusing her attention on the other customers, particularly Desmond's table, where she delivered beers with a forced smile. The bruises on her wrist were more visible now, the sleeve of her uniform having ridden up when she reached across the table. Careful there, Desmond said, catching her arm when she placed his beer in front of him. Don't want another accident, do we? The veiled threat wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. Vera's smile tightened, but she said nothing, attempting to withdraw her arm from his grip. I asked you a question earlier, Desmond persisted, tightening his hold. About your military friend over there. Please, Desmond, Vera said quietly, her eyes darting toward the Admiral and back. Not now. Not now, he mimicked, his voice taking on a cruel edge. Always not now with you lately. Maybe I should ask him myself. That won't be necessary, Admiral Rhodes's voice carried easily across the diner as he stood, leaving his untouched meal. He approached their table with unhurried steps, his bearing making him seem even taller than his actual height. I believe the lady asked you to let go. The diner fell silent again, every patron suddenly finding themselves unwilling spectators to the confrontation. Desmond released Vera's arm, but stood to face Rhodes, alcohol giving him bravado he might not otherwise have displayed toward a senior military officer. This is a private conversation, Desmond said, puffing up his chest slightly. No offense, Admiral, but it doesn't concern you. I disagree, Rhodes replied mildly, though there was steel beneath his calm tone. When someone manhandles a woman in my presence, it becomes my concern. Desmond laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet diner. Manhandles? She's my girlfriend. We're just talking. Is that what you call it? Rhodes's gaze dropped pointedly to Vera's wrist, where the bruises were clearly visible. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like assault. The word hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Several customers shifted uncomfortably, guilt flickering across their faces as they realized their complicity through silence. You don't know what you're talking about? Desmond scoffed, though uncertainty had begun to creep into his posture. Tell him, Vera. Tell him we're fine. All eyes turned to Vera, who stood rigid beside the table, her face a careful blank. For a moment, she seemed caught between her established role as the quiet, accommodating waitress and something else entirely. Something that straightened her spine and hardened her gaze. Please, she said to Rhodes, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't do this. The Admiral studied her for a long moment, something like regret passing across his features. "I'm afraid it's too late for that, Lieutenant Commander." The title fell into the stunned silence like a stone into still water, sending ripples of confusion through the diner. Desmond's cocky expression faltered, replaced by bewilderment. "Lieutenant what?" he asked, looking between Vera and Rhodes. "What the hell are you talking about?" Vera closed her eyes briefly, as if in pain. When she opened them again, something had shifted in her demeanor, a subtle but unmistakable change that several patrons noticed but couldn't quite identify. "You've made a mistake, Admiral," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'm just a waitress." Rhodes raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Are you? Then perhaps you can explain how just a waitress recognizes a rear admiral at 30 paces, or why she bandages a wound with the precision of a combat medic, or," his voice softened slightly, "why she flinches at sudden movements and positions herself with clear sightlines to all exits." Each observation hit Vera like a physical blow. Small tells she thought she had successfully buried beneath years of careful obscurity. The mask she had constructed began to crack, revealing glimpses of someone else beneath, someone with eyes that assessed and calculated, someone whose stillness wasn't meekness, but coiled readiness. "I don't know what you're implying," she said carefully, "but you're mistaken." "Am I?" Rhodes countered, reaching slowly into his pocket and withdrawing a small, worn photograph. He placed it on the table, facing Vera. "Then this isn't you?" From where he stood, Desmond could see the image, though most of the diner could not. It showed a group of naval personnel in combat gear, standing before a helicopter in a dusty mountainous landscape. At the center stood a woman with Vera's face, though her hair was shorter and her expression far more confident than anything they had seen from the quiet waitress. "Where did you get that?" Vera asked, her voice barely audible. "You know exactly where," Rhodes replied. "Operation Falcon Spear, Zingerli Province." The foreign name seemed to trigger something in Vera, a visible flinch that had nothing to do with physical pain. "That was classified," she said, forgetting her denial in her surprise. "Not anymore," Rhodes informed her. "Not after 3 years." Desmond stared at the photograph, then at Vera, confusion and anger warring on his face. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, grabbing her arm again, rougher this time. "Some kind of joke?" The movement was too sudden, too aggressive. Without conscious thought, Vera reacted, her free hand coming up to break his grip with a precise strike to the inside of his wrist. The maneuver was executed with the fluid expertise of someone with extensive close-quarters combat training. Desmond stumbled back, more from shock than pain, his expression a mixture of disbelief and growing anger. "You just hit me," he said incredulously. "No," Vera corrected, a different cadence entering her voice, more confident and commanding. "I defended myself. There's a difference." The admission hung in the air, an acknowledgement that the Vera they thought they knew was indeed someone else entirely. Sheriff Donovan had left his seat at the counter and now approached the group, hand resting cautiously on his weapon. "I think everyone needs to calm down," he said, though his own confusion was evident. "Admiral, perhaps you could explain what exactly is going on here." Rhodes turned to face the sheriff, his bearing formal and official. "I apologize for the disruption, Sheriff. I didn't intend for this identification to become a public matter." He gestured toward Vera. "But it appears we've located a missing naval officer." "Missing?" Donovan repeated, looking at Vera with new eyes. "As in AWOL?" "No," Rhodes clarified. "As in presumed dead for the past 3 years." Gasps and murmurs spread through the diner as customers abandoned all pretense of not listening. Vera herself remained utterly still, her face a study in contained emotion. "This is ridiculous," Desmond interrupted, finding his voice again. "I've known Vera for almost a year. She's a waitress, not some Navy whatever." "Navy SEAL," Rhodes corrected mildly. Or, more accurately, Naval Special Warfare Medical Officer attached to SEAL Team 3, Lieutenant Commander Vera Larson, one of the most decorated combat medics in recent naval history. The title seemed to hang in the air between them, at once foreign and familiar to Vara, like a uniform she had packed away but never truly discarded. "That's not possible," Desmond scoffed, looking around for support. "She's just a woman." "A woman who apparently broke your hold without breaking a sweat," Sheriff Donovan observed dryly. which lends some credibility to the Admiral's claim. Rhodes turned his attention back to Vera, his expression softening slightly. "It's time to come home, Lieutenant Commander. Your team has been looking for you for 3 years." Vera's composure finally cracked, a flicker of genuine emotion crossing her face. "My team," she repeated, the words carrying a weight of memory and loss. "There is no team. Not anymore. Not after December 17th. The date clearly meant something significant to both her and Rhodes, whose expression grew grave. "Not all of them were lost that day," he said quietly. "Thanks to you." Before Vera could respond, Desmond stepped forward, anger and alcohol overriding his better judgment. "I don't know what game you're playing," he said to Rhodes, "but you can't just walk in here and start making crazy accusations about my girlfriend." "This isn't a game, Mr. Thorne," Rhodes replied, his patience visibly thinning. "And from what I've observed, your relationship with the Lieutenant Commander appears to be less than healthy." Desmond's face flushed with anger. "You don't know anything about us," he spat, taking another step toward Rhodes. "Vera, tell them. Tell them this is all some kind of mistake." All eyes turned to Vera once more, the diner collectively holding its breath. She stood very still, caught between the life she had carefully constructed in Port Ashton and the truth that Rhodes had laid bare. For a long moment she said nothing, the weight of decision visible in her rigid posture. Then, slowly, she rolled up her sleeve, revealing not just the bruises around her wrist, but a long surgical scar that ran from elbow to palm. It was the mark of significant trauma and extensive reconstruction, the kind of injury that told its own story of violence and survival. "It's not a mistake," she said finally, her voice steady, though quiet. "I was there, Zingerle Province, December 17th. Desmond stared at the scar as if seeing it for the first time, though surely he must have noticed it in their months together. "What are you saying?" he asked, his anger giving way to confusion. "That you're actually some kind of soldier?" "SEAL," she corrected automatically. "We're called operators, not soldiers." The terminology came naturally, further evidence of the identity she had submerged but not forgotten. Sheriff Donovan looked as though he was struggling to reconcile the quiet waitress he'd known for 3 years with this new information. "If what the Admiral says is true," he said carefully, "why are you hiding in Port Ashton? Why let people think you were dead?" Vera's gaze dropped to the photograph still lying on the table, to the faces of people who had once been closer to her than family. "Because I couldn't save them all," she said simply, the admission clearly costing her. The raw honesty of her statement silenced the diner once more. Even Desmond seemed momentarily subdued, perhaps recognizing the genuine pain behind her words. Rhodes stepped closer to Vera, his voice gentle but firm. "No one could have saved them all that day. What you did was nothing short of miraculous. 10 hostages, 4 team members, all extracted under heavy fire after you'd been wounded yourself." Vera's hand went unconsciously to her side, where another scar lay hidden beneath her uniform. The memory of that day was etched not just in her flesh, but in her mind, a constant companion these past 3 years. "It wasn't enough," she said quietly. "It was more than anyone had a right to expect," Rhodes countered, "which is why you received the Navy Cross, why your name is on a wall of honor at headquarters, why we never stopped looking for you, even after the memorial service." "Memorial service?" Vera repeated, genuine surprise breaking through her control. "You held a memorial for me?" Rhodes nodded solemnly. "Full honors, your parents were there, your sister, the surviving members of your team. Everyone believed you had died of your wounds after ensuring the others reached safety." Vera closed her eyes, absorbing this information with visible pain. "I never meant to hurt them," she whispered. "I just couldn't face them after what happened, after who we lost." Desmond had been watching this exchange with growing agitation, alcohol and anger overriding his ability to process the situation rationally. "This is insane," he interrupted, his voice rising. "You're all acting like this is normal, like finding out the town waitress is some kind of secret military hero makes any kind of sense." "Mr. Thorne," Sheriff Donovan warned, "I suggest you calm down." "Calm down?" Desmond laughed bitterly. "When I just found out my girlfriend has been lying to me for months, pretending to be someone she's not?" He turned his anger on Vera. "Was any of it real? Or was I just convenient cover for whatever game you're playing?" The accusation struck deeper than Vera let show. "It wasn't a game, Desmond," she said quietly. "And I never lied about who I am. I just didn't tell you everything about who I was. Like the fact that you're supposedly some elite soldier," he scoffed. "That seems like a pretty big omission." "Operator," she corrected again, a hint of steel entering her voice. "And yes, it was, but I had my reasons." "Which were what, exactly?" Desmond demanded. "To make a fool out of me? To laugh behind my back while playing the helpless girlfriend?" Vera's expression hardened, the first real anger she had displayed. "Helpless?" she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "Is that what you thought when you put these bruises on my arm? That I was helpless?" The direct accusation fell into the diner like a thunderclap. Several patrons gasped, and Sheriff Donovan's hand moved more deliberately toward his weapon. Desmond himself seemed momentarily taken aback by her boldness. His customary dominance challenged for perhaps the first time. "You're twisting things," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "That was an accident. We had an argument. Things got heated." "Things got heated," Vera echoed, rolling her sleeve further up to reveal more bruises in various stages of healing. "And the week before that, and the month before that, all accidents." The evidence was undeniable, visible proof of ongoing abuse that the town had suspected but chosen to ignore. Shame flickered across several faces in the diner, particularly Sheriff Donovan's. "Why didn't you say something?" the sheriff asked, directing his question to Vera. "I could have helped." "Could you?" Vera countered, meeting his gaze steadily. "When you saw the bruises yourself and chose to accept my excuses? When everyone in this diner has seen Desmond's behavior for months and said nothing?" The accusation struck home. No one could meet her eyes, the collective guilt of a community that had failed one of its own hanging heavy in the air. "That still doesn't explain why someone with your training would allow it to happen," Rhodes said quietly, the question that had clearly been bothering him since he recognized her. "The Vera Larson I knew would never have tolerated such treatment." The observation seemed to penetrate Vera's armor more deeply than anything else that had been said. She looked at Rhodes with eyes that suddenly seemed older, wearier than her years. "The Vera Larson you knew died in Zinjirli province," she said softly, along with half her team and every ounce of confidence she had in her own judgment. The woman who came to Port Ashton didn't trust herself to make the right calls anymore. Not in combat, not in life. The admission hung in the air, a glimpse into the depth of trauma that had driven a decorated officer to abandon her identity and seek anonymity in a small coastal town. Desmond, sensing he was losing control of the situation, made one final attempt to reassert himself. "This is all very touching," he sneered, "but I'm not buying this whole secret soldier story. If you're such a badass, why hide it? Why pretend to be nobody?" "Because being nobody was easier than being the person who failed to save everyone," Vera replied, her gaze never leaving Rhodes. "Because every time someone called me hero, all I could think of were the faces of those who didn't make it home." Rhodes' expression softened with understanding. "Survivor's guilt," he said, naming what Vera herself had been unable to articulate. "It's a hell of a thing to carry alone." "I wasn't ready to carry it any other way," Vera admitted. The bell above the door chimed, breaking the intense moment. Everyone turned, half expecting more naval personnel, but it was only a pair of tourists who stopped short at the threshold, clearly sensing they had walked into the middle of something significant. "We're closed," Harlan called from behind the counter, making an executive decision. "Private event." The tourists retreated, the door closing behind them, with a soft jingle that seemed incongruously cheerful in the tense atmosphere. Desmond, increasingly frustrated by the direction of the conversation, made a fatal miscalculation. He stepped forward, grabbing Vera's arm once more, his fingers digging into the bruises he had left days earlier. "We're leaving," he announced. "Now. Whatever game you're playing with your military friend, it's over." What happened next occurred so quickly that most patrons would later disagree about the exact sequence of events. One moment Desmond was gripping Vera's arm, his face contorted with anger. The next, he was on his knees, arm twisted behind him at an angle that made several onlookers wince in sympathy. Vera standing over him with an expression of calm focus that transformed her familiar features. The waitress was gone, replaced by the operator who had survived one of the most harrowing extractions in recent naval history. Her movements had been so fluid, so precisely executed, that even Rhodes looked, momentarily impressed. "I told you," she said to Desmond, her voice steady and controlled. "I'm not helpless. I never was. I just chose not to fight back, for reasons you couldn't possibly understand." She released him with a small push that sent him sprawling forward, more from surprise than the force of the movement. Sheriff Donovan stepped between them, his hand now resting openly on his weapon. "That's enough," he said firmly. "Desmond, I think you and your friends should leave, now, and I'll be talking to you later about those bruises." Desmond climbed to his feet, his face flushed with humiliation and rage. He looked at Vera as if seeing her for the first time, the realization that she had been holding back, allowing his abuse when she could have easily defended herself, clearly unsettling him. "This isn't over," he said, the threat hollow in the wake of her demonstration. "Yes, it is," Vera replied, and there was such finality in her tone that even Desmond seemed to recognize the truth of it. Whatever had existed between them was finished, irrevocably altered by the revelation of who she really was. He backed toward the door, his friends following sullenly. As they left, the bell's cheerful chime once again providing an odd counterpoint to the tension in the diner. In the silence that followed their departure, Rhodes turned to Vera, his expression a mixture of respect and concern. "What happens now is up to you, Lieutenant Commander," he said quietly, "but I think you know you can't stay here, not after this." Vera nodded slowly, the weight of decision visible in her bearing. "I know," she acknowledged. "I think I've been running long enough." Rhodes seemed satisfied with this response. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing not a weapon, but a simple flip phone. He pressed a single button, waiting as it connected. "This is Admiral Rhodes," he said when the call was answered. "Headland Diner, Port Ashton." He paused, listening to the response on the other end. "Yes, that's correct. She's here." As he ended the call, the diner seemed to collectively hold its breath, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Vera herself stood very still, her expression a complex mixture of resignation, fear, and perhaps, buried deep beneath the surface, relief. "What did you just do?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Rhodes pocketed the phone, his expression grave but not unkind. "I notified your team that you're alive. They're currently stationed at Naval Base Kitsap, conducting training exercises. They can be here within the hour." Vera's composure faltered for the first time, genuine emotion breaking through her careful control. "My team," she repeated, the words carrying a weight of memory and loss. "Who?" "Commander Kalaji," Rhodes replied, watching her reaction carefully. "Lieutenant Farron, Chief Webb, the ones who survived Zinjirli because of you." The names struck Vera like physical blows, each one connected to memories she had tried to bury beneath 3 years of forced anonymity. Her breathing quickened slightly, the only visible sign of the emotional storm beneath her surface. "They never stopped looking for you," Rhodes continued quietly. "Even after the official search was called off, they refused to believe you were gone." Vera closed her eyes briefly, absorbing this information. "And now they're coming here," she said, not a question, but a statement of fact, a reality she was still processing. "Yes," Rhodes confirmed, "to bring you home, if you're ready." The word home seemed to resonate through the diner, carrying different meanings for different people. For the locals, it was Port Ashton, the small coastal town where nothing ever happened until today. For Rhodes, it clearly meant the Navy, the institution to which he had devoted his life. But for Vera, standing at the crossroads of her past and her carefully constructed present, home was a more complicated concept. "And if I'm not ready?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rhodes studied her for a long moment before answering. "Then, they'll want to know why," he said honestly. "They'll want to understand how someone they thought they knew, someone they trusted with their lives, could disappear without a word, could let them believe she was dead for 3 years while she served coffee in a coastal diner." The assessment was fair but cutting, laying bare the reality of what Vera's disappearance had meant to those she had left behind. She flinched slightly, but did not dispute it. "I thought it would be easier for everyone," she admitted, "if they believed I was gone, if they didn't have to face what happened that day through me." "Easier for them or for you?" Rhodes asked, the question gentle but pointed. Vera had no answer for that. At least none she was willing to voice aloud in a diner full of people who were still trying to reconcile the quiet waitress with the combat-trained operator she had revealed herself to be. Outside, the first distant sound of approaching vehicles could be heard, the low rumble of engines growing steadily louder as they neared the diner. Headlights swept across the parking lot, illuminating the interior with stark clarity for a brief moment before darkness returned. "They're here," Rhodes said simply, watching as Vera's expression shifted from uncertainty to a strange mixture of dread and longing. "What happens next is up to you, Lieutenant Commander. But whatever you decide, you don't have to face it alone. Not anymore." The door to the Waypoint Diner swung open, and for a moment, the only sound was the soft jingle of the bell. Commander Nazreen Kalaji entered first, her crisp naval uniform a stark contrast to the faded wood paneling and worn vinyl booths. She was tall and striking, with a jagged scar running along her jawline that somehow enhanced rather than detracted from her commanding presence. Her dark eyes scanned the room with military precision before settling on Vera. The recognition was instant and visceral, a jolt of connection visible to everyone watching. For a heartbeat, neither woman moved. Then Kalaji stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of 3 years of uncertainty. "Lieutenant Commander Larson," she said formally, though emotion threatened to break through her professional demeanor, "request permission to approach." The formality of the question, so out of place in the small-town diner, struck Vera like a physical blow. It was a gesture of respect, of acknowledgement, offered in the precise language of the world she had fled. She straightened instinctively, muscle memory responding before conscious thought. "Granted," she managed, the single word coming out hoarse. Behind Kalaji, more naval personnel filed in silently, arranging themselves with tactical precision around the diner's perimeter. 14 in total, some in dress uniforms like Kalaji, others in civilian clothes that did nothing to disguise their military bearing. Their faces reflected a complex mixture of emotions: shock, relief, confusion, and in some cases, what might have been anger. Sheriff Donovan moved to stand beside Admiral Rhodes, his expression bemused. "You want to tell me what's happening in my town, Admiral?" "A reunion," Rhodes replied simply. "One long overdue." Kalaji approached Vera slowly, as one might approach a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. When she stood just an arm's length away, close enough that the rest of the diner could no longer hear their exchange, she spoke again, her voice dropping to a whisper. "V," she said, using a nickname that made Vera flinch. "We thought you were dead." "I know," Vera replied, unable to meet her former teammate's gaze. "I'm sorry." "Sorry?" Kalaji repeated, a hint of steel entering her tone. "We buried an empty casket. Your name is on the memorial wall. Your parents nearly collapsed at the service." Each statement hit Vera like a precisely placed strike, finding the vulnerable points in her armor. She had known there would be consequences to her disappearance, but hearing them laid out so directly made them impossible to ignore. "I couldn't face them," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Not after what happened, not after who we lost." Kalaji's expression softened slightly, understanding warring with hurt. "We all lost people that day, V, but the rest of us didn't vanish without a trace." Before Vera could respond, one of the other naval officers approached, Lieutenant Farron, younger than Kalaji, but with the same air of contained competence. His eyes were fixed on Vera with an intensity that made several diner patrons shift uncomfortably. "Is it true?" he asked, his question directed at Kalaji, but his gaze never leaving Vera. "Is it really her?" "It's her," Kalaji confirmed, stepping back slightly to create space between them. Farron studied Vera for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he moved forward and wrapped her in a fierce embrace. "We looked everywhere for you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Even after they called off the official search, we never stopped." The unexpected display of affection seemed to break something in Vera. Her rigid posture collapsed, and for a moment, she leaned into the embrace, her eyes closing briefly against the tide of emotions threatening to overwhelm her careful control. Around the diner, the other naval personnel began to approach, forming a loose circle around their long-lost teammate. Some merely nodded in solemn acknowledgement, while others reached out to touch her arm or shoulder, as if confirming her solidity, her realness. Sheriff Donovan watched this procession with growing bewilderment. "Would someone please explain what's going on?" he asked, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I've got half the Navy in my jurisdiction, and a waitress who apparently isn't just a waitress." Admiral Rhodes gestured for the sheriff to join him at a nearby booth, creating a small bubble of relative privacy amidst the emotional reunion taking place. "It's a long story, Sheriff," he said, his tone serious, "and much of it remains classified. But the essentials are these. Lieutenant Commander Vera Larson was the senior medical officer attached to a SEAL team conducting a high-risk extraction operation in Zinjirli Province 3 years ago." "Where exactly is Zinjirli Province?" Donovan interrupted, brow furrowed. "Afghanistan, along the northern border," Rhodes replied. "A particularly volatile region. The team was sent to extract aid workers who had been taken hostage by insurgents. The intelligence was faulty. It was an ambush." Understanding began to dawn on the sheriff's face as he glanced back at Vera, seeing her in a new light. "And her team?" "6 casualties," Rhodes said grimly, including her fiancé, the team's point man. 4 survivors extracted under heavy fire after Larson established a defensive position in an abandoned structure. She performed emergency field surgery on 2 critically wounded teammates, coordinated air support over a damaged radio, and held off insurgent forces for 18 hours until extraction arrived. Donovan whistled softly, trying to reconcile this account with the quiet woman who had poured his coffee for 3 years. "And she was injured?" "Critically," Rhodes confirmed. "Multiple gunshot wounds, shrapnel, significant blood loss. She ensured everyone else was aboard the extraction helicopter before allowing herself to be evacuated. Lost consciousness during transport. The medical team aboard didn't expect her to survive the flight to the field hospital." "But she did," Donovan said, stating the obvious. "She did," Rhodes agreed. "Underwent multiple surgeries, was airlifted to Germany, then back to Naval Medical Center San Diego. She was still unconscious when they transported her, still in critical condition. Then, during a shift change at the hospital, she disappeared. No security footage, no witnesses, just gone. Given her condition, most assumed she had left the hospital, succumbed to her injuries elsewhere, and her body simply hadn't been found." "But you didn't believe that," Donovan surmised, noting the Admiral's tone. "I had my doubts," Rhodes acknowledged. "Larson was exceptional, even among special warfare operators. If anyone could disappear despite the odds, it would be her. But after months of searching with no trace, even I began to accept the possibility that she was gone. Until today," Donovan said, glancing back at the reunion still unfolding in the center of the diner. "Until today," Rhodes confirmed, following his gaze. Across the diner, the initial shock of the reunion had begun to settle into something more complex. The naval personnel had arranged themselves around Vera in a protective formation that seemed instinctive rather than planned, creating a barrier between her and the curious locals still watching from their booths. "Why here?" one of the officers was asking, gesturing around the diner. "Of all the places you could have gone, why Port Ashton?" Vera's gaze dropped to her hands, which were clasped tightly in front of her. It was far from any military installation, small enough that no one would ask questions, remote enough that I could disappear into the background. "For 3 years, Kalaji said, the hurt evident in her voice despite her attempt to mask it. 3 years, V, while we mourned you, while your family held a memorial service with an empty casket. The accusation hung in the air, unanswered because there was no adequate response. Vera had made her choice, knowing the pain it would cause those who cared for her, and now she had to face the consequences of that decision. I'm sorry, she said again, knowing the words were insufficient, but having nothing better to offer. Sorry doesn't cut it, another officer, Chief Webb, a stocky man with close-cropped hair, said bluntly. Not for this. That's enough, Chief, Admiral Rhodes interjected, returning from his conversation with Sheriff Donovan. Lieutenant Commander Larson's reasons for her actions are her own. Our priority now is ensuring her safety and well-being. Webb looked like he wanted to argue, but subsided at a warning glance from Kalaji. The tension in the group remained, however, an undercurrent of hurt and betrayal beneath the relief of finding their missing teammate alive. Sheriff Donovan approached, his expression a mixture of awe and lingering confusion. Lieutenant Commander, he said, addressing Vera formally for the first time. The Admiral has explained some of what happened. I want to extend the full cooperation of my department in whatever you need." Vera nodded, acknowledging the offer without fully accepting it. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said quietly. "But I think what I need most right now is some time to process all of this." "Of course," Donovan agreed quickly, perhaps relieved to have a reason to step back from the increasingly complex situation. "I'll make sure Desmond Thorne doesn't cause any more trouble while you sort things out." The mention of Desmond seemed to remind everyone of the confrontation that had precipitated this revelation. Several of the naval officers exchanged glances, their expressions darkening at the memory of the bruises visible on Vera's wrist. "About Thorne," Webb began, his tone suggesting he had specific ideas about how to handle the situation. "The sheriff will handle it," Rhodes said firmly, cutting off whatever suggestion the chief had been about to make. "This is still a civilian jurisdiction." Webb subsided again, though the set of his jaw suggested he remained unconvinced that legal channels were the appropriate response to someone who had harmed one of their own. Harland, who had been watching the proceedings from behind the counter with a mixture of concern and fascination, finally approached the group. "Maybe we should close up," he suggested, nodding toward the few remaining local customers who were making no effort to hide their interest in the unfolding drama. "Give you folks some privacy to sort this out." Rhodes nodded gratefully. "That would be appreciated, mister." "Just Harland," the cook said, extending a hand which the Admiral shook firmly. "Known Vera since she walked into town 3 years back. Always knew there was more to her story than she let on, though I never imagined anything like this." Vera looked up at that, surprised. "You knew?" Harlan shrugged, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Not the details, of course, but the way you moved, the way you were always aware of every person in the room, every exit, the way you bandaged cuts and treated burns in the kitchen like you'd had medical training way beyond first aid. Wasn't hard to figure you had some kind of military background." "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Vera asked, genuine curiosity breaking through her emotional turmoil. "Figured you had your reasons for keeping it to yourself," Harlan replied simply. "Wasn't my place to pry. We've all got our stories, our reasons for ending up where we are." The simple acceptance in his words seemed to touch Vera more deeply than any of the emotional reunions that had preceded it. For a moment, her careful composure threatened to crack completely, but she maintained control with visible effort. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For that, and for everything else over the past 3 years." Harlan nodded, understanding the deeper meaning beneath her words. "Been an honor having you here, regardless of what name or rank you went by." He turned to address the remaining customers. "All right, folks, we're closing up early today. Family emergency. Your meals are on the house." There were a few grumbles, but the locals recognized the seriousness of the situation and began to gather their belongings. As they filed out, many cast curious glances at Vera and the naval personnel surrounding her, clearly aware they were witnessing something significant but unable to fully grasp its magnitude. When the last customer had departed, Harlan locked the door behind them and flipped the sign to "Closed." "Take all the time you need," he said, retreating to the kitchen to give them privacy. In the quiet that followed, Vera found herself at the center of attention once more, surrounded by people from a life she had tried to leave behind. The weight of their expectations, their questions, their hurt, pressed down on her like a physical burden. "What happens now?" she asked, directing the question to Admiral Rhodes, though she was aware of every pair of eyes watching her. Rhodes considered the question carefully before responding. "That depends largely on you, Lieutenant Commander. Officially, you've been listed as missing, presumed deceased for 3 years. There will need to be formal procedures to reinstate your status, medical evaluations, debriefings." He paused, his tone softening slightly. "And there are people who need to know you're alive, your family for one." The mention of her family sent a visible shudder through Vera. "They've already mourned me," she said quietly. "Maybe it would be kinder to let them continue believing I'm gone." "That's not your decision to make," Kalaji said firmly. "Not anymore. Not after what they've been through." Vera didn't argue, perhaps recognizing the truth in the commander's words. She had made one unilateral decision that had caused immeasurable pain to those who loved her. She had no right to make another. "I know," she acknowledged, her voice barely audible. "I just don't know if I can face them. Face any of this." "You won't have to face it alone," Farron said, stepping forward. That's what teammates are for, what family is for. The simple declaration hung in the air, a reminder of what Vera had walked away from 3 years ago, and what was now being offered to her again, despite everything. The enormity of it seemed to overwhelm her momentarily. "I'm not the person you remember," she warned, looking around at the familiar faces now transformed by 3 years of life and experience she hadn't shared. "I'm not sure I can be that person again." "No one expects you to be unchanged," Rhodes said gently. "We've all been altered by what happened in Zinjirli, by the losses we suffered. The question is whether you're ready to stop running from those changes and start finding a way forward." The question cut to the heart of Vera's self-imposed exile, laying bare the truth she had been avoiding for 3 years. She had fled not just from the pain of loss, but from the person that loss had transformed her into, someone she didn't recognize and wasn't sure she could live with. Before she could formulate a response, the sound of raised voices outside the diner interrupted the moment. Through the window, they could see Desmond Thorne engaged in a heated argument with Sheriff Donovan in the parking lot. Several other locals had gathered, drawn by the unusual activity around the normally quiet diner. "Trouble," Webb observed, moving instinctively toward the door. "Stand down, Chief," Rhodes ordered. "Let the sheriff handle it." Webb hesitated, clearly reluctant to remain passive while a potential threat developed. "With respect, Admiral, that's the man who put bruises on the LT's wrists, and he looks intoxicated and agitated." Rhodes's expression hardened. "And this is still a civilian jurisdiction, Chief. We are guests here, and we will conduct ourselves accordingly." The exchange highlighted the unusual dynamics at play: naval personnel operating on civilian soil, military discipline intersecting with small-town law enforcement. It was a powder keg of potential complications that Rhodes was clearly attempting to manage with careful precision. Outside, the confrontation between Desmond and Sheriff Donovan appeared to be escalating. Desmond's voice carried through the closed door, loud and slurred with anger and alcohol. "You can't just shut down the whole town for some military stunt," he was shouting, gesturing wildly toward the diner. "She's my girlfriend, and I want to talk to her." "Not going to happen, Desmond," Donovan replied, his tone firm but controlled. "Not tonight, not in your condition. Go home, sleep it off. We can sort this out tomorrow." "Sort what out?" Desmond demanded. "How she's been lying to everyone? Playing some kind of game?" Inside the diner, Vera watched the confrontation with a complex mix of emotions playing across her features. Guilt, certainly, for the deception that had been at the core of her relationship with Desmond, but also a growing resolve, a straightening of her spine that transformed her posture from the submissive waitress to the confident officer she had once been. "I need to talk to him," she said suddenly, moving toward the door. Kalaji stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "That's not a good idea, V. He's drunk, angry, and feeling humiliated. Not a combination that leads to productive conversations." "He deserves some kind of explanation," Vera insisted. "He's right about one thing. I've been lying to him, to everyone in this town, for 3 years." "Explanations can wait until he's sober," Rhodes said, supporting Kalaji's position. "Right now, our priority is ensuring your safety and beginning the process of your official return." Vera looked between the two senior officers, a flash of the old defiance crossing her face. "With all due respect, Admiral, my safety isn't in question, and I've been making my own decisions for 3 years now. I'm not going to stop just because you found me." The statement hung in the air, a clear challenge to the authority structure that had once defined Vera's life. Rhodes studied her for a long moment, perhaps reassessing the woman's standing before him in light of this assertion of independence. "Very well, Lieutenant Commander," he said finally, emphasizing her rank, "but you don't go alone. Commander Kalaji and Lieutenant Farron will accompany you." It was a compromise, acknowledging Vera's autonomy while still maintaining a protective framework around her. She nodded, accepting the terms without further argument. As the three moved toward the door, Webb called after them. "If he makes one wrong move, Commander, I want authorization to intervene." "Noted, Chief," Kalaji replied without turning around. "But let's hope it doesn't come to that." Sheriff Donovan looked up in surprise as the diner door opened and Vera emerged, flanked by Kalaji and Farron. His expression shifted to concern as he moved to intercept them before they could reach Desmond. "This isn't a good idea," he said in a low voice, echoing Kalaji's earlier warning. "He's been drinking since he left here, and he's worked himself up into quite a state. I appreciate your concern, Sheriff, Vera replied, her voice steady and assured in a way Donovan had never heard before. But I need to speak with him, briefly, and then we'll leave peacefully. Donovan hesitated, clearly torn between his duty to maintain order and his growing realization that the woman he thought he knew was capable of handling herself in ways he hadn't previously considered. Your call, he said finally, stepping aside, but remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. But I'll be right here if things go south. Vera nodded her thanks and continued forward, Kalaji and Farron maintaining their positions slightly behind her. A clear message to anyone watching that she was not alone or unprotected. Desmond watched their approach with narrowed eyes, his posture aggressive despite the way he swayed slightly on his feet. The drinking he had done since leaving the diner earlier had clearly not improved his emotional state. Finally decided to talk to me, he called as they neared. Or do you need your military bodyguards to do the talking for you? They're not bodyguards, Desmond, Vera said evenly. They're my teammates, my family. The distinction seemed to enrage rather than appease him. Family? He spat. You've been with me for 8 months, living in my house for 3 of them, and suddenly these people you haven't seen in years are your family. They've always been my family, Vera replied quietly, even when I tried to pretend otherwise. The simple truth of the statement hung in the air between them, a final acknowledgement of the deception that had underpinned their relationship from the beginning. Desmond's face contorted with a mixture of hurt and anger. Was any of it real? He demanded, an echo of the question he had asked inside the diner. Or was I just convenient cover for whatever game you're playing? Vera considered the question seriously, owing him that much at least. Parts of it were real, she said finally. I cared. For you, in my way. But I wasn't honest about who I was, about my past. That was unfair to you, and I'm sorry for it. The apology, sincere though it was, seemed to further inflame Desmond's anger rather than mollify it. Sorry, he repeated bitterly. You let me believe you were someone you're not for months, and all you can say is, you're sorry? What would you have me say, Desmond? Vera asked, a hint of the steel that had once defined her beginning to show through. That I should have told you I was a combat-decorated SEAL operator with PTSD and survivor's guilt on our first date? That I came to Port Ashton because I couldn't face the people who knew what I'd lost, what I'd failed to prevent? Her voice had risen slightly, emotion breaking through her careful control for the first time since the confrontation began. Behind her, Kalaji and Farron exchanged glances, recognizing the raw vulnerability beneath her words. You could have trusted me, Desmond said, though some of the anger had begun to leach from his tone, replaced by a wounded confusion. Instead of lying, instead of playing this role of the meek girlfriend who needed my protection. Vera's expression softened slightly. I wasn't playing a role, not entirely. After what happened in Zinjirli, after losing my team, my fiancé, I didn't trust my own judgment anymore. I didn't trust myself to make the right calls, in combat or in life. So yes, for a while, it was easier to let someone else make the decisions, to be the person you thought I was, rather than face who I had become. The raw honesty of her admission seemed to reach Desmond in a way that nothing else had. For a moment, the anger drained from his face, leaving behind a complicated mixture of hurt and something that might have been understanding. Your fiancé? He repeated, focusing on that one detail among everything she had said. Vera nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to the empty space on her ring finger where once a band had rested. Commander Elias Thorne, she said quietly. He was point man on the mission, first one through the door when everything went wrong. Desmond stared at her, something shifting in his expression. Thorne, he repeated. Elias Thorne? Yes, Vera confirmed, studying his face with sudden intensity. Did you know him? A strange laugh escaped Desmond, bitter and hollow. Know him? He was my brother. The revelation fell into the stunned silence like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through everyone present. Kalaji and Farron exchanged alarmed glances, while Sheriff Donovan moved closer, sensing the sudden escalation in tension. That's not possible, Vera said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias never mentioned a brother named Desmond. He wouldn't have, Desmond replied, a strange calm settling over him now, as if the revelation had somehow steadied him. We had different fathers. I kept my mother's maiden name, Thorn, after the divorce. Elias took our stepfather's name when he was adopted at 12, legally became Elias Costas. The details aligned with what Vera knew of Elias's background, lending credibility to Desmond's claim. She stared at him with new eyes, searching his features for traces of the man she had loved and lost. They were there, she realized with growing horror, in the shape of his jaw, the set of his shoulders. How had she not seen it before? "Why didn't you say something?" she asked, her voice unsteady. When we started dating, why not mention that your brother was a SEAL?" Desmond's laugh was bitter. "Because I didn't know you had any connection to the military, did I? You were just Vera the waitress, quiet and unassuming. And I was just Desmond Thorne, who moved to Port Ashton to start over after my brother died, in some classified operation that the Navy wouldn't tell us anything about." The implications of what he was saying began to dawn on Vera, a sick feeling growing in her stomach. "You came here because of Elias," she said slowly. "Because this is where he grew up." Desmond nodded, confirmation of her theory. "Came to pack up the family cabin, the one our grandfather left him. Ended up staying, felt closer to him here than back in Seattle." The coincidence was too immense, too cruel to be believed. Of all the small towns along the Oregon coast, Vera had chosen the one with connections to her dead fiancé, and then, unknowingly, had become involved with his brother. "This can't be real," she said, more to herself than to anyone present. "The statistical probability isn't that high when you consider the factors involved," Kalaji interjected quietly. "Elias talked about Port Ashton sometimes, about growing up here. It's possible you retained that information subconsciously, that it influenced your choice when you were looking for somewhere to disappear." The theory made a certain psychological sense, but it did nothing to mitigate the shock of the revelation or its implications. Vera stared at Desmond, seeing him now through the lens of this new knowledge, understanding his anger and sense of betrayal in an entirely new context. "You were there," he said, his voice dropping to an intense whisper. "You were there when he died. All this time, you knew how my brother died, and you never said a word." The accusation struck Vera like a physical blow. "I didn't know who you were," she said, though the defense sounded hollow, even to her own ears. "I never made the connection." "But you knew he had a brother?" Desmond pressed, stepping closer despite the warning movements from Kalaji and Farron. "You were going to marry him. You must have known he had family. And you let us believe he died instantly, painlessly. Let us bury an empty casket with no answers." Each statement struck with pinpoint accuracy, finding the vulnerable spots in Vera's carefully constructed armor. She had known, of course. Elias had spoken of his brother, his mother, his stepfather, had shown her photographs, shared stories. But in her grief, in her desperate flight from everything connected to that day in Zinjirli, she had buried those memories along with so much else. "I'm sorry," she said again, knowing the words were entirely inadequate. The mission was classified. The details of how he died, of how anyone died that day, couldn't be shared with families. "That's official policy, yes," Admiral Rhodes interjected, having approached quietly during the exchange. "But it doesn't explain why you didn't recognize Mr. Thorne or make the connection once you became involved with him." The question hung in the air, unanswered, because Vera herself didn't fully understand how she had missed something so significant. Had she been so deeply immersed in her new identity, so committed to burying her past, that she had overlooked the obvious? "I don't know," she admitted finally. "Maybe I didn't want to see it. Maybe I didn't want to face any connection to that day to what happened." Desmond studied her face, his anger now tempered with a strange, sad understanding. "You loved him," he said, not a question but a statement of fact. "And you couldn't save him." The simple truth of those words broke through Vera's remaining defenses. "No," she said, her voice cracking. "I couldn't save him. I tried, I did everything I could, but he was already gone by the time I reached him." The admission hung in the air, raw and painful, the first time Vera had spoken those words aloud since the official debriefing 3 years earlier. Kalaji moved closer, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder, while Farron maintained his protective stance, though his expression had softened with sympathy. Desmond's face underwent a complex series of emotions, anger giving way to grief, then to a strange, sad resignation. "They never told us how he died," he said quietly. "Just that it was in service to his country, that he died a hero." "He did," Vera confirmed, finding her voice again. "He went in first, as he always did, to clear the path for the rest of us. The intelligence was wrong, the building was rigged. He took the full force of the initial blast, but he managed to warn the rest of the team before she paused, searching for words that wouldn't cause more pain, before he was gone. It wasn't the complete truth, not by any measure. The reality had been far more brutal, far more chaotic. But some details would serve no purpose except to compound the grief Desmond and his family had already endured. "He didn't suffer?" Desmond asked, the question revealing what truly mattered to him. Vera met his gaze steadily. "No," she said with quiet certainty. "It was instantaneous." This, at least, was not a lie. Whatever pain Eliash had experienced in those final moments had been mercifully brief, his injuries too catastrophic for prolonged suffering. Desmond nodded slowly, absorbing this information. For a moment, he seemed to deflate, the anger that had sustained him, giving way to a profound weariness. "All this time," he said softly, "all these months together, and I never knew I was looking at the woman who was with my brother when he died." The statement contained no accusation, just a sad acknowledgement of the strange, cruel twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. Vera had no response, no defense or explanation that could make sense of such cosmic irony. "I think," Sheriff Donovan interjected gently, "that this might be enough for tonight. Desmond, let me drive you home. You've had too much to drink to be behind the wheel." Desmond didn't resist, perhaps too emotionally drained to argue further. He allowed the sheriff to guide him toward the patrol car, pausing only once to look back at Vera. "Did he say anything?" he asked suddenly. "At the end, was there a message for us, for his family?" Vera hesitated, torn between truth and mercy. In those final chaotic moments in Zinjirli, with explosions and gunfire all around them, there had been no time for last words, no peaceful passing with messages for loved ones. But she remembered conversations before the mission, casual comments that took on new significance in retrospect. "He talked about you," she said finally, "about growing up together in Port Ashton, about the cabin your grandfather left him. He was planning to bring me here after the deployment to show me where he came from." She paused, swallowing hard against the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "He was proud of you, proud of the man you'd become, despite everything you'd both been through." Whether this constituted a final message was debatable, but it was the truth, or at least a version of it that might bring some comfort. Desmond absorbed it in silence, his eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," he said simply, then turned and allowed Sheriff Donovan to lead him away. As the patrol car pulled out of the parking lot, Vera felt the weight of the confrontation settle fully on her shoulders. The revelations of the past hour had shattered the carefully constructed reality she had built for herself in Port Ashton, exposing truths she had been running from for 3 years. "Are you all right?" Kalaji asked quietly, still standing close enough that her presence offered silent support. Vera considered the question, truly considered it for perhaps the first time in years. "No," she admitted finally, "but maybe that's okay. Maybe it's time to stop pretending I am." The simple honesty of the statement seemed to resonate with everyone present. Rhodes approached, his expression grave but not unkind. "Lieutenant Commander," he said formally, "I think it's time we discussed your return more seriously. There are people who need to know you're alive, decisions that need to be made about your future." Vera nodded slowly, accepting the inevitable with a resignation that carried hints of both relief and trepidation. "Yes, sir," she said, falling back on the familiar patterns of military protocol. "But there's something I need to do first." Rhodes raised an eyebrow in question. "I need to see the cabin," Vera explained. "Eliash's cabin, our cabin in a way. I need to see where he came from, what he wanted to show me, before I can decide where I'm going next." The request was unexpected but not unreasonable. Rhodes exchanged glances with Kalaji, who nodded slightly, indicating her support for the idea. "Very well," the Admiral agreed. "Commander Kalaji and Lieutenant Farron will accompany you. The rest of us will secure transportation and accommodations for the team. We can reconvene in the morning to discuss next steps." It was a compromise that acknowledged Vera's need for some measure of closure while maintaining the protective framework that her teammates had instinctively formed around her. She accepted it with a nod, grateful for the understanding, however limited. As the group began to disperse, Harland emerged from the diner, having witnessed much of the confrontation through the window. He approached Vera with the same unassuming directness that had characterized their relationship for the past 3 years. "Quite a day," he observed mildly. Vera managed a small, tired smile. "You could say that." "You'll be leaving, I expect," Harland continued. "Not a question, but a statement of fact." "Now that they've found you?" "Yes," Vera confirmed, seeing no point in pretense. "There are things I need to face, people I need to see. I've been running for too long." Harland nodded, unsurprised. "Well, you know where to find us if you ever want to come back. Your job will be waiting, no questions asked." The simple offer, made with no expectations or demands, touched Vera deeply. In this small coastal town, despite all her deceptions and hidden truths, she had found a measure of acceptance she hadn't expected or perhaps deserved. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Harland waved away her gratitude with typical gruff affection. "Been an honor having you here, Lieutenant Commander, even if we didn't know who we had." As he turned to go back inside, Kalaji approached, her expression thoughtful. "He's a good man," she observed. "I can see why you stayed." "Yes," Vera agreed simply. "One of many reasons." They walked together toward the naval vehicles still parked in the lot, Farron falling into step beside them. The events of the day had transformed the quiet routine of Port Ashton irrevocably, exposing secrets and reshaping relationships in ways that could never be undone. As they reached the vehicles, Kalaji handed Vera a small folded flag, the kind presented at military funerals. "This was meant to be yours," she said quietly. "After the memorial service. Your parents asked me to keep it, since there was no gravesite to leave it at." Vera took the flag with trembling hands, its weight insignificant, yet somehow immense. It represented everything she had been running from, the ceremonies and honors she had not been present to receive or refuse, the grief of those left behind. "They held a memorial service for me," she said, the reality of it finally sinking in fully. An empty casket, a folded flag, dress uniforms, the whole ceremony. "Yes," Kalaji confirmed gently. "Full honors. The team was there. What was left of us. Your parents, your sister. Even the president sent a representative. The image was almost too much to bear. The thought of her loved ones gathered to mourn someone who wasn't actually gone." Vera clutched the flag tighter, its edges digging into her palms, the physical discomfort a welcome distraction from the emotional pain threatening to overwhelm her. "I need to see them," she said suddenly, the decision crystallizing in that moment. "My family, before anything else, before debriefings or reinstatement or whatever comes next. I need to see them, to explain in person." Kalaji and Farron exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "We'll make it happen," Kalaji promised. "First the cabin, then your family, one step at a time." As they climbed into the vehicle, Vera clutched the folded flag to her chest like a talisman, a tangible connection to the life and identity she had abandoned 3 years ago. The weight of it against her heart was both burden and anchor, a reminder of all she had lost and all she might yet reclaim. Behind them, Port Ashton receded in the gathering dusk, the small town that had sheltered her in her self-imposed exile, now forever altered by the truth of who she really was. Ahead lay Eliash's cabin, the place he had wanted to share with her, the final piece of the puzzle that might help her understand not just who she had been or who she had become, but who she might yet be. The Thorne family cabin sat nestled among towering pines at the end of a winding dirt road, 3 miles inland from Port Ashton. Built by Eliash and Desmond's grandfather in the 1970s, it was a simple structure of weathered cedar and stone that seemed to have grown organically from the forest floor. In the fading light of evening, with mist curling between the trees, it had an ethereal quality, as if it existed partially in another world. Vera stood motionless at the edge of the small clearing, the folded flag still clutched in her hands, staring at the place Eliash had spoken of so often during their time together. The place he had promised to bring her after his final deployment, the place where he had imagined them building a life together. "You okay?" Kalaji asked quietly, standing just behind her shoulder. I don't know, Vera answered honestly. It's exactly how he described it, every detail, down to the crooked weather vane on the roof. Farron approached from where he had been securing the perimeter, a habit ingrained by years of operations in hostile territory. No sign of Desmond or anyone else, he reported. Place looks unoccupied, though. Someone's been maintaining it. Firewood's stacked, gutters are clear. Vera nodded absently, her attention fixed on the cabin. Eliash said his brother came up every few months to check on things, even before, she paused, swallowed, before Zinjirli. I guess he kept up the tradition. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, following the stone path that led to the front porch. Each step felt momentous, as if she were crossing a threshold not just into a physical space, but into the past she had been running from for 3 years. The key was exactly where Eliash had said it would be, hidden in a small metal box disguised as a stone beside the front steps. Her fingers trembled slightly as she retrieved it, the simple brass key a tangible connection to the man she had loved and lost. Do you want us to wait out here? Kalaji offered, sensitive to the deeply personal nature of the moment. Vera hesitated, torn between her desire for privacy and the comfort of having her teammates close. No, she decided finally. Come in, please. I don't think I can do this alone. The door opened with a soft creak of hinges that needed oiling, revealing an interior that was rustic but well-maintained. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, flanked by comfortable-looking furniture draped with hand-woven blankets. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with a mix of well-worn paperbacks and leather-bound classics. A collection of fishing rods stood in one corner beside a pair of worn hiking boots. It was a space that spoke of history and continuity, of generations of family memories layered one atop the other. And everywhere, Vera could see traces of Eliash, from the dog-eared copy of Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea on the side table to the chess set arranged mid-game on a small table by the window. He loved this place, she said softly, moving further into the room. Said it was the only place he could truly relax, truly be himself, away from the pressure, the missions, the constant readiness. Kalaji and Farron remained near the door, giving her space to absorb the surroundings at her own pace. Their presence was supportive but unobtrusive, a silent affirmation that she was not alone in this journey back through painful memories. As Vera moved deeper into the cabin, her attention was drawn to a series of photographs arranged on the mantelpiece above the fireplace. She approached slowly, almost reverently, her eyes fixed on the images of a life she had known only through stories. Eliash as a child, gap-toothed and grinning beside a much younger Desmond. Eliash as a teenager, proudly holding up a large fish beside the lake, visible through the cabin's rear windows. Eliash in his dress whites at the Naval Academy graduation, his mother beaming beside him, and there, at the end of the row, a photograph Vera had never seen before, herself and Eliash, arms around each other, laughing at something off camera. It had been taken during a rare weekend of leave at a small beachside restaurant near the base. She had no memory of Desmond being present, but he must have taken the photograph and later sent it to his brother. He had a good eye, Farron observed, having moved closer to see what had captured her attention. Caught a real moment there. Vera nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. She reached out, fingers hovering just above the frame without quite touching it, as if afraid it might dissolve under her hand. There are more, Kalaji said gently, gesturing to a photo album lying open on the coffee table. Moving as if in a dream, Vera sank onto the worn leather couch and drew the album onto her lap. It was open to a page of photographs from the team's last gathering before the Zinjirli mission. A barbecue at Kalaji's house, everyone in civilian clothes, relaxed and smiling, unaware of what awaited them. I remember this day, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Eliash burned the hamburgers. Chief Webb brought that homemade moonshine that gave everyone a hangover. Except you, Kalaji recalled, a small smile lifting the corner of her mouth. You switched to water after the first sip and thought none of us noticed. I was on call at the medical center, Vera explained, the memory surfacing with unexpected clarity. Couldn't risk being impaired if an emergency came in. Always the responsible one, Farron said, the teasing affection in his tone, a callback to the camaraderie they had once shared. Vera continued turning pages, moving backward through time, Team training exercises, holiday gatherings, casual moments between missions. Each photograph was a window into a life she had deliberately locked away, a reminder of who she had been before grief and guilt had driven her to become someone else entirely. When she reached the end of the album, she closed it gently, running her fingers over the leather cover. "I don't understand why Desmond would keep these," she said, puzzlement clear in her voice. "After what happened to Elias, after what he's been through, why surround himself with these reminders?" "Sometimes reminders are all we have left," Kalaji replied softly. "Sometimes they're the only way to keep someone alive in our hearts." The simple truth of the statement hung in the air, a gentle rebuke to Vera's own choice to run from reminders rather than embrace them. She had fled from memory itself, believing that distance could somehow mitigate loss. But here was Desmond, despite his anger and grief, preserving memories, maintaining connections to his brother's life. "I've been a coward," Vera said suddenly, the realization crystallizing with painful clarity. "All this time, I thought I was protecting myself, protecting others from what happened, but I was just hiding, from the pain, from the responsibility, from all of it." "That's not fair," Farron objected, his loyalty to his former team leader evident. "After what you went through physically and emotionally, no one could blame you for needing time to heal." "Time, yes," Vera agreed. "But 3 years of letting my family believe I was dead, of letting you all think you'd failed to find me, that wasn't healing, that was hiding, and it was selfish." The harsh self-assessment hung in the air, neither Kalaji nor Farron rushing to contradict it. Perhaps they recognized that this moment of reckoning was necessary, that Vera needed to confront the full reality of her choices before she could move beyond them. "What happens now?" Farron asked finally, giving voice to the question that loomed over all of them. Before Vera could respond, the sound of a vehicle approaching outside interrupted the moment. Kalaji moved swiftly to the window, her training evident in the fluid efficiency of her movement. "Sheriff's car," she reported. "Donovan and Desmond." Vera stood, setting the photo album carefully back on the coffee table. "I need to talk to him, alone this time." Kalaji looked like she might object, but after a moment's consideration, she nodded. "We'll be right outside. If you need us, just call." As her teammates slipped out through the back door, Vera moved to the front entrance, steeling herself for another confrontation. But when she opened the door to greet the arrivals, she was met with a scene far different from what she had anticipated. Desmond stood beside Sheriff Donovan, but his demeanor had transformed completely from the angry drunk man they had left in the parking lot. He was sober now, his expression a complex mixture of grief, exhaustion, and something that might have been resignation. "Thought you might be here," he said quietly. "Mind if I come in? It's my cabin too, after all." The gentle attempt at humor, however strained, suggested he was at least trying to approach the situation with some measure of equanimity. Vera stepped aside, allowing both men to enter. "Sheriff Donovan insisted on accompanying me," Desmond explained as they moved into the main room. "Wanted to make sure I wasn't going to cause any more trouble." "Just doing my job," Donovan said mildly, though his watchful gaze suggested he was taking his responsibility seriously. "Making sure everyone stays civil." Vera nodded her understanding, then turned her attention back to Desmond. "I'm glad you came. There's so much we need to talk about, so much I need to explain." "Yeah," Desmond agreed, his eyes traveling to the photographs on the mantel, lingering on the one of Vera and Elias together. "There is, but first, I owe you an apology." The unexpected statement caught Vera off guard. "You owe me an apology?" she repeated, genuinely confused. "For the bruises," Desmond said simply, gesturing toward her wrist where the marks were still visible beneath her sleeve. "For my behavior these past months, for taking out my grief and anger on someone who didn't deserve it, especially someone who meant so much to my brother." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, a genuine remorse that transcended the complex circumstances that had brought them to this point. Vera found herself at a loss for words, having expected continued anger or accusations rather than this humble acknowledgement. "I don't understand," she said finally. "After everything that happened today, after finding out I've been lying to you for months, that's what you want to apologize for." Desmond moved to the couch, sinking onto it with the air of a man carrying a heavy burden. "When the sheriff drove me home, he made me drink about a gallon of coffee and then showed me something. My arrest record from Seattle. 3 domestic violence complaints from my ex-wife, all dropped because she refused to press charges. Sound familiar? The revelation hit Vera like a physical blow. She had seen the pattern, of course, the escalation of control and aggression that characterized abusive relationships. But she had never connected it to Desmond's past, had never considered that she might not be the first woman to bear the marks of his temper. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "No reason you would," Desmond replied. "I never told anyone here about that part of my life. Came to Port Ashton for a fresh start, just like you. Difference is, I was running from what I'd done, not what had been done to me." The distinction was significant, a clear-eyed assessment of moral culpability that suggested Desmond had done some serious reflection in the hours since their confrontation at the diner. "What changed?" Vera asked, genuinely curious. "Between the parking lot and now?" Desmond's gaze returned to the photograph of his brother. "Eliash would be ashamed of me," he said simply, "of how I've been living, of how I've treated you. That's not the man he knew, not the brother he was proud of." The mention of pride echoed Vera's earlier words about Eliash's feelings for his brother, creating a strange symmetry to their shared grief and regret. For a moment, they were united in their desire to honor the memory of the man they had both loved, each in their own way. "We've both made mistakes," Vera said gently. "Both failed to live up to what Elias might have expected of us." Desmond nodded, accepting the assessment without argument. "So, where do we go from here?" he asked, echoing Farron's earlier question. "You'll be leaving, I assume, going back to the Navy, to your real life." The question hung in the air, loaded with implications about identity and belonging, about what constituted a real life versus the one Vera had constructed in Port Ashton. Before she could formulate a response, the sound of multiple vehicles approaching outside drew their attention. Sheriff Donovan moved to the window, his expression shifting to one of surprise. "Looks like the cavalry has arrived," he commented. "Whole fleet of Navy vehicles coming up the drive." Vera rose, a flutter of anxiety in her chest. She had hoped for more time, more space to process everything before facing the full weight of official protocols and procedures. But it seemed time had run out. Admiral Rhodes led the procession up the cabin's front steps, his expression grave but not unkind. Behind him came the remainder of the team who had assembled at the diner, along with several naval personnel Vera didn't recognize, likely administrative and medical staff tasked with handling her official return. "Lieutenant Commander," Rhodes greeted her formally as he entered. "I apologize for the intrusion, but there have been developments that require immediate attention." The formality of his tone, the presence of so many personnel, sent a chill through Vera. Had something happened? Was there some new crisis related to her reappearance? "What kind of developments, sir?" she asked, unconsciously straightening into a more military posture. Rhodes's expression softened slightly. "Your family, Lieutenant Commander, they've been notified of your status." The simple statement hit Vera with unexpected force. "How?" she managed, her voice barely audible. "I thought we agreed I would speak to them personally." "The situation evolved beyond our control," Rhodes explained. "One of the patrons at the diner posted about the incident on social media. It went viral within hours. Naval Public Affairs had no choice but to issue a statement confirming your survival to prevent speculation and protect your privacy as much as possible." The realization that her carefully guarded secret had been exposed so publicly, so suddenly, left Vera momentarily speechless. The controlled, gradual return she had envisioned had been rendered impossible by the realities of modern communication. "Where are they now?" she asked when she found her voice again. "My parents, my sister?" "En route," Rhodes informed her. "They were flown from Boston to Portland on a naval aircraft and are being driven here as we speak. ETA approximately 1 hour. 1 hour. 60 minutes until she would face the people she had hurt most deeply with her disappearance. The people who had mourned her, buried her, tried to move on without her. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and oddly liberating, the inevitability of it removing the burden of choice. "I need to clean up," she said automatically, glancing down at her waitress uniform, still stained with coffee from the dropped pot earlier that day. "I can't meet them like this." "We brought your dress uniform," Kalaji said, stepping forward with a garment bag that Vera hadn't noticed until that moment. "If you're ready for it." The question behind the statement was clear. Was Vera ready to reclaim not just her identity, but the visible symbols of it? The uniform she had once worn with pride, the rank she had earned through years of service and sacrifice. Without hesitation, Vera took the bag, her decision made. "Thank you, Commander," she said, the formal address feeling both foreign and familiar on her tongue. "I'll just be a moment." In the small bathroom at the rear of the cabin, Vera changed slowly, each item of the uniform a step in the transformation from Vera the waitress back to Lieutenant Commander Larson. The crisp white shirt, the dark pants with their perfect crease, the jacket with its insignia and ribbons, all felt like armor being reassembled piece by piece. When she emerged, the impact was immediate and profound. A ripple of reaction passed through the assembled personnel, from Admiral Rhodes's approving nod to the younger officer's barely concealed awe. Even Desmond seemed affected, his expression a complex mixture of emotions as he saw Vera fully embodying the military identity she had hidden for so long. "Permission to speak freely, sir," one of the younger officers asked Rhodes, unable to contain himself. "Granted, Lieutenant," Rhodes replied, though his tone suggested he already knew what was coming. "Is it true, sir?" the young man asked, his gaze fixed on Vera with undisguised admiration. "About Zinjerli province? About the extraction?" Rhodes glanced at Vera, silently deferring to her preference on how much to share. She hesitated only briefly before nodding her consent. If her story was already spreading through social media, better that the truth be told accurately than distorted through speculation. Lieutenant Commander Larson was the senior medical officer attached to SEAL Team 3 during Operation Falcon Spear. Rhodes began, his voice taking on the measured cadence of an official briefing. When the team was ambushed in Zinjerli province, she established a defensive position in a partially collapsed structure, treated the wounded under continuous enemy fire, and coordinated air support over a damaged radio system for 18 hours until extraction was possible. He paused, his gaze moving to Vera with unmistakable respect. Despite sustaining multiple gunshot wounds and significant shrapnel injuries, she ensured every surviving teammate and hostage was evacuated before allowing herself to be extracted. Her actions that day saved 12 lives, including 4 members of her team who would almost certainly have died without her medical intervention and tactical leadership. The cabin had fallen completely silent, every person present absorbing the magnitude of what Rhodes was describing. Vera herself stood rigid, the memories that his words evoked threatening to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. For her extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty, Lieutenant Commander Larson was awarded the Navy Cross, Rhodes continued, only the 5th woman in naval history to receive the decoration. She was also awarded the Silver Star, the Purple Heart with oak leaf clusters, and was recommended for the Medal of Honor, a process that was suspended when she was presumed deceased. The litany of honors hung in the air, a stark contrast to the quiet life Vera had constructed for herself in Port Ashton. The young lieutenant who had asked the question looked nearly overcome with emotion, while several other officers stood noticeably straighter, as if in the presence of living history. "Sir," the lieutenant said finally, his voice thick, "it's an honor to meet you, Lieutenant Commander. What you did that day, it's what we all hope we'd be capable of if faced with the same situation." Vera felt a complicated surge of emotion at the young officer's words. For 3 years, she had run from exactly this kind of recognition, believing she didn't deserve it, that it mocked the losses they had suffered that day. But now, standing in Elias's cabin, surrounded by her teammates and the visible symbols of the life she had once led, she began to see it differently. "The honor is shared, Lieutenant," she replied, finding her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "No one person wins medals. They're earned by teams, by the training and support and sacrifice of everyone involved." She glanced at Kalaji, at Farin, at the other survivors of Zinjerli who had never stopped looking for her, especially those who continue the mission long after the official objectives are complete. The simple acknowledgement of their persistence, their loyalty, seemed to touch her former teammates deeply. Kalaji's typically stoic expression softened, while Farron blinked rapidly against what might have been tears. A silence fell over the cabin, not uncomfortable but weighted with emotion and significance. It was Sheriff Donovan who finally broke it, clearing his throat awkwardly. "I think I should head back to town," he said, clearly sensing that what would follow was beyond his jurisdiction in more ways than one. "Desmond, you want a ride?" All eyes turned to Desmond, who still sat on the couch, watching the proceedings, with an expression that had gradually shifted from initial shock to something approaching understanding. He shook his head slowly. "No, thanks, Sheriff," he replied. "I think I should stay. For Elias, if nothing else." He glanced at Vira, a silent communication passing between them. "If that's all right with you, Lieutenant Commander." The formal address, offered without irony or mockery, represented a profound shift in how Desmond saw her. No longer Vera the waitress, the girlfriend he had dominated and occasionally abused, but a decorated officer with a history and identity he was only beginning to comprehend. "Of course," Vera said simply. "You belong here as much as anyone." As Sheriff Donovan took his leave, Admiral Rhodes approached Vera, his expression serious but not stern. "Lieutenant Commander, before your family arrives, there are some official matters we need to address. Your status, your medical evaluation, the procedures for reinstatement to active duty, if that's what you decide." Vera nodded, accepting the necessity of bureaucracy even in such an emotionally charged situation. "Yes, sir. But if I may, I'd like to request a moment alone with my team. First." Rhodes studied her for a moment, then nodded his understanding. "Of course. Take the time you need. I'll assemble the administrative personnel in the vehicles until you're ready." As Rhodes and the unfamiliar naval personnel filed out of the cabin, Vera found herself surrounded by the people who had once been closer to her than family, the teammates with whom she had trained and fought and bled, the ones she had abandoned without explanation 3 years ago, leaving them to believe she was dead. "I don't know where to begin," she admitted, looking around at their faces, each familiar and yet altered by the passage of time. "Saying I'm sorry seems woefully inadequate." "Then don't say it," Webb suggested gruffly, the first time he had spoken directly to her since the reunion at the diner. "Show it instead." "How?" Vera asked, genuinely seeking guidance. "What can I possibly do to make up for 3 years of letting you believe I was gone?" "Come home," Kalaji said simply. "Not necessarily back to active duty, if that's not what you want, but back to the world, back to the people who care about you. Stop hiding." The directness of the request, the lack of recrimination or demand for explanation, touched Vera deeply. These people who had every right to be angry, to demand answers, were instead offering her a path forward, a way back from the exile she had imposed on herself. "I don't know if I can be who I was before," she warned, giving voice to her deepest fear. "I don't know if I can ever be that person again." "No one's asking you to be," Farron assured her. "We've all changed, V, all been shaped by what happened that day, by the losses we suffered, by the past 3 years. The question isn't whether you can go back to being who you were. It's whether you're ready to discover who you are now, with us beside you, instead of in your past." The wisdom in his words struck a chord within Vera, offering a perspective she hadn't considered. She had been so focused on the impossibility of returning to her former self that she hadn't contemplated the possibility of moving forward to become someone new, someone who incorporated both her past and her present. Before she could respond, the sound of yet more vehicles approaching outside signaled a new arrival. Through the window, she could see a convoy of black SUVs with government plates turning into the cabin's clearing. "They're here," Kalaji said softly, placing a supportive hand on Vera's shoulder. "Your family." The moment Vera had both dreaded and longed for had arrived, the inevitable confrontation with those she had hurt most deeply through her disappearance. She straightened her uniform jacket, squared her shoulders, and moved toward the door, her team falling in behind her in a silent formation of support. Outside, the SUVs had come to a stop, their headlights illuminating the misty clearing in harsh relief. As Vera watched, the door of the lead vehicle opened and her mother emerged, a small woman with silver-streaked hair and Vera's own blue-gray eyes. Behind her came Vera's father, tall and stooped, looking older than Vera remembered, the grief of the past 3 years etched into the lines of his face. And finally, her sister Lena, who had been her confidant and best friend since childhood. For a long moment, the family stood frozen, staring at Vera in her dress uniform, illuminated in the glow of the cabin's porch light. The distance between them seemed both infinite and infinitesimal, 3 years of separation compressed into a few yards of pine needle-strewn ground. Then, with a cry that contained too many emotions to name, Vera's mother broke the tableau, rushing forward with arms outstretched. Vera met her halfway, enveloped in an embrace so fierce it threatened to undo all her careful composure. "My baby," her mother sobbed, hands moving frantically over Vera's face, her shoulders, as if confirming her solidity, her realness. "My baby girl, you're alive. You're really alive." Vera's father and sister joined the embrace, creating a tangle of arms and tears and broken words. Behind them, naval personnel maintained a respectful distance, allowing the family their privacy in this most public of reunions. "I'm so sorry," Vera managed, her voice breaking as the walls she had built around her emotions finally crumbled completely. "I'm so sorry for what I put you through, for letting you think I was gone, for everything." "Shh," her mother soothed, exactly as she had when Vera was a child, with scraped knees or wounded pride. "You're here now. You're alive. That's all that matters." But Vera knew it wasn't that simple, couldn't be that simple. The wounds she had inflicted went deeper than absence, cut to the core of trust and love and family bonds. "I should have contacted you," she insisted, needing them to understand the depth of her remorse. "I should never have let you go through a funeral, a memorial, all of it, when I was still alive." Her father, always the quieter of her parents, placed a weathered hand against her cheek. "Why didn't you?" he asked, the simple question containing no accusation, only a father's need to understand his child's pain. Vera swallowed hard, searching for words that could possibly convey the complexity of her decision. "I thought it would be easier," she admitted finally. "For all of us. I wasn't the person you knew anymore, wasn't the daughter you raised or the sister you grew up with. After what happened in Zinjirli, after what I'd seen, what I'd done and failed to do, I didn't know how to come back to you as someone you wouldn't recognize." "Oh, V," her sister said softly, using the childhood nickname that Kalaji had also favored. "Did you really think we'd love you less because you'd been changed by something terrible? Did you think we couldn't handle seeing you struggle?" The questions cut to the heart of Vera's self-imposed isolation, exposing the fear and shame that had driven her decision more clearly than any explanation she had offered thus far. She had been afraid not of their rejection, but of their unconditional acceptance, afraid they would love her even when she couldn't love herself. "I couldn't face you," she whispered, the truth finally emerging in its raw, unvarnished form. "Couldn't face any of you. Not because of what you might think of me, but because of what I knew about myself. That I had survived when others hadn't. That I had made calls that cost lives, even if they saved others. That I wasn't worthy of the medals or the honors or the pride I saw in your eyes at every promotion, every achievement." The admission hung in the night air, a confession not just to her family, but to herself, to the teammates who stood witness, to the memory of those lost in Zinjirli. For 3 years, Vera had been running not from external judgment, but from her own, from the harsh and unforgiving assessment she had made of herself in the aftermath of tragedy. Her mother's hands framed her face, forcing Vera to meet her gaze directly. "Listen to me," she said, her voice firm despite the tears still streaming down her cheeks. "You have always been more than your accomplishments, more than your rank or your medals or your successes. You are my daughter. Nothing you could do or fail to do would ever change that. Nothing." The simple, unconditional declaration struck Vera with the force of revelation. All this time, she had been measuring herself against an impossible standard, believing that her worth was tied to her ability to save everyone, to prevent all loss, to make perfect decisions in impossible situations. But in her mother's eyes, in her father's steady presence, in her sister's tearful smile, she saw a different truth, that she was loved not for what she did or didn't do, but simply for who she was. "I want to come home," she said finally, the words emerging from some deep place within her that had been silent for 3 years. "I don't know exactly what that means yet, or what happens next, but I'm ready to stop running, ready to find out who I am now, with all of you beside me." The declaration was met with a fresh wave of embraces, of tears and murmured reassurances. Around them, the naval personnel maintained their respectful distance, but Vera could see the emotion on many faces, the understanding that they were witnessing something profound and deeply personal. Admiral Rhodes eventually approached, his expression a careful balance of official duty and human compassion. "Lieutenant Commander," he said gently, "I hate to intrude, but there are protocols that need to be followed, paperwork that needs to be completed, and your family has been through quite a journey today. Vera nodded, understanding the necessity of procedure, even in such an emotionally charged moment. Of course, Admiral. What happens now? We've arranged accommodations at Naval Base Kitsap, Rhodes explained. For you and your family, medical evaluations, debriefings, the formal process of reinstating your status, all can be handled there over the coming days. The mention of reinstatement brought Vera up short. Sir, I haven't decided yet whether I want to return to active duty. I'm not sure if that's the right path for me now. Rhodes nodded, unsurprised by her hesitation. That decision doesn't need to be made tonight, Lieutenant Commander, or even this week. Take the time you need, consult with medical professionals, with your family, with your team. Whatever you decide, the Navy will support you. The assurance offered without pressure or expectation was exactly what Vera needed to hear. After 3 years of making decisions in isolation, the thought of having time, support, and guidance as she determined her next steps was both comforting and empowering. As the group began to move toward the waiting vehicles, Desmond stepped forward from where he had been watching the reunion from the cabin's porch. His approach was hesitant, uncertain of his place in this naval proceeding. Lieutenant Commander, he said formally, addressing Vera with a respect that would have been unimaginable just hours before. Before you go, there's something that belongs to you. Something Eliash would have wanted you to have. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box, the kind used for jewelry. With hands that trembled slightly, he held it out to Vera. He showed it to me, last time he was home on leave. Said he was going to give it to you when he returned from that final deployment. Vera accepted the box with a sense of both dread and anticipation, knowing instinctively what it contained. When she opened it, her suspicion was confirmed. A simple platinum engagement ring with a small diamond, elegant and understated, exactly what she would have chosen for herself. He knew you couldn't wear anything flashy with your work, Desmond explained, his voice rough with emotion. Said you needed something that wouldn't catch on medical equipment or tactical gear. He spent weeks finding the right one. The revelation that Eliash had planned so carefully, had known her preferences and needs so well, brought fresh tears to Vera's eyes. This tangible evidence of a future that had never materialized, of plans made and lives envisioned that had been cut short by violence and chance, was almost too much to bear. Thank you, she managed, closing the box carefully and placing it in her uniform pocket, close to her heart. For keeping it all this time, for taking care of his memory. Desmond nodded, understanding the deeper meaning beneath her words. It's what brothers do, he said simply. What family does. Remember each other, honor each other, even when it hurts. The simple truth resonated deeply with everyone present, a reminder of the bonds that transcended absence, that endured even through grief and loss. Vera looked around at the gathered faces, her blood family, her military family, even Desmond, connected to her through the brother she had loved, and felt for the first time in 3 years that she was exactly where she belonged. As they moved toward the waiting vehicles, Vera paused for one final look at the cabin, at the place that had meant so much to Eliash, that he had wanted to share with her. In the soft glow of the porch light, with mist curling between the ancient pines, it seemed to exist in a moment outside of time, a sanctuary where past and present could coexist without contradiction. Goodbye, she whispered, not to the structure itself, but to the life she had imagined there, the future that would never come to pass. It was not a farewell tinged with bitterness or regret, but a gentle release, an acknowledgement that some dreams must be laid to rest before new ones can take root. As she turned away, her gaze fell on the stars visible through gaps in the mist-laden canopy, the same stars that had shone over Zinjirli province on that fateful day, the same stars that would continue to shine long after all of them were gone, bearing witness to both tragedy and triumph, to endings and beginnings. In that moment, Lieutenant Commander Vera Larson, decorated naval officer, survivor, daughter, sister, teammate, and now, finally herself, took the first step on a journey not back to who she had been, but forward to who she might yet become.